Be okay. It's all okay in the end.
Now, train drivers for ASLEF have reached a deal with the government that could end more than 2 years of conflict between rail operators and unions.
Well, the offer, thought to be around 15%, will now be put to its members and could bring an end to a standoff stretching back to July 2022.
On the international front, authorities in Russia's Kursk region have evacuated 200,000 people following continued Ukrainian advances in parts of the area.
So, after 2.5 years, is war in Europe finally coming to an end?
All right, lots to talk to former Conservative Armed Forces Minister James Heappey about this morning. Good to see you. Can we start with trains? Because obviously strikes were a plight that we've all had to cope with over the last few years. It's been an absolute disaster for a lot of us. Do you agree with what the government seems to have done and put forward this, or arranged at least with the operating companies, this much better deal?
Well, look, even though I'm no longer a politician, I'm going to need to give you a politician's answer, because the answer is yes and no. I get that the strikes in themselves have a cost. They have a cost to the railway and they have a cost to the economy because of the loss of productivity. And so in that sense, they do need to be resolved. However, the difficulty is that invalidating the strike approach by basically buckling and giving the strikers what they want, I'm not sure you bring an end to strikes. I fear that you encourage more. Or, at the very least, you will raise the expectation of all other parts of the public sector workforce to expect similar pay rises. And then you have the question of how on earth these pay rises are afforded. Now, in the government showing such largesse, whilst the rail industry is largely still privatised, the only way those companies meet the increased pay bill is through increased fares. So we pay in the end. And when they do it with workforces that are entirely still in the government's employment, like, for example, within the NHS, within the military or the police or wherever else, then I'm nervous that Rachel Reeves will show this largesse, but then expect departments to fund those increased pay bills from within their existing budgets, which means it comes at the expense of other things that those departments are already doing. So, you know, like I said, yes, it's good to see the strikes resolved. They're a pain in the arse and they cost the economy and the rail companies a lot of money. But you know, if the government is just going to cave to every pay demand that's put to it, over time, that will become incredibly expensive and come at the cost of other things.
Yes, that's just... Be careful with our language, Mr Heappey. Apologies if anyone...
Apologies.
We've got to be very careful, you know, because we get watched and monitored. Within all of this, I have to say, and I know it seems like a bit long form in a sense, but the whole strategy of this government is to grow the economy. So if the economy is growing, then we all do better out of it. And in some respects, isn't it worth the investment in meeting the union demands to try and get everyone back to work, in terms of those people who were on strike, in terms of us being able to facilitate our journeys to work and all the rest of it? Doesn't that help the overall picture?
To a point, yes. And I think in the discussion on any given pay deal, you can, of course, make that analysis. My point is simply that cumulatively, as all of these pay deals are done, if similar largesse is shown everywhere, then you end up with something that is cumulatively very unaffordable for government or for the companies that government is intervening in.
I mean, you've alluded to it already, but the biggest question is, how is this all going to be paid for? There are fears now about tax rises to come in the autumn from Rachel Reeves. And there's a story yesterday, and you alluded to that earlier, with cuts to other departments, but Labour reportedly looking to cut millions from the budget for modernising the armed forces, which seems a strange decision considering what we're talking about with the Russia-Ukraine war.
So I saw that too. I mean, I saw an extraordinary line in one of the newspapers that said that Rachel Reeves is seeking cuts within non-frontline departments like defence, and I think went on to say transport and some others. Interesting that in these geopolitical times, defence is not a frontline department, but and also at odds with the sort of thing that Labour was saying during the election campaign when they were making lots of noise about their enthusiasm for increased defence spending. And this nonsense that, of course, they did mean that at the time, but they've since found this incredible black hole that they had no idea of. I mean, I just think that is already exposed as a nonsense. And the fact that a lot of that black hole is made up to our previous discussion about the settlement with the rail unions. A lot of that black hole is actually made up by the decision Rachel Reeves has taken over pay settlements in the first few weeks of her tenure in number 11. So politics is easy if you're going to say yes to everyone. The problem is eventually it catches up with you and you have forced to start making choices that will be unpopular. And what I'm hearing is that if, for example, a similar pay deal were done to the armed forces, and who would say that our soldiers, sailors, aviators don't deserve a pay rise, but if the Treasury says they get that pay rise, but it comes out of the existing MOD budget, there's no new money for it, then the obvious consequence is fewer tanks, fewer planes, fewer ships in order to pay troops more. Not saying that troops don't deserve more money, but just pointing out that if no new money comes from the Treasury, then it has to come at the expense of something the department is already doing.
Yeah, it makes absolutely no sense whatsoever, does it? Look, in terms of the conflict, the Russia-Ukraine conflict, there are people talking about, well, perhaps this is it's the beginning of the end, perhaps, by this incursion into Russia by Ukraine, what is happening there. Is that a realistic assessment of what's going on, or is it just wishful thinking?
Yeah, that was exactly the words that I was going to use in response to where I thought your question would end. It is wishful thinking, I'm afraid. It is good in that it proves that Ukraine is perfectly capable of getting on the offensive. It shows just how attritional the battle on the long-standing front line now is, where they're just in this constant grind. Whichever side is on the offensive is running up against very well-prepared defences. At the moment, Russia is moving forward, but very, very slowly and at enormous cost to its army. Where the defences are less well-prepared, Ukraine has shown that it can break through and gain some pretty quick success. The West should use this as a siren call to keep backing Ukraine because they're showing us that what they're capable of. But I'm afraid that it means nothing in terms of accelerating towards the end of the war.
You can imagine it will be good for morale, though, inside Ukraine, especially seeing Russian prisoners of war, for example.
Hugely so. In sport as much as in war, nobody revels in defence. It is much more. It's much more enjoyable, frankly, to be on the offensive.
Okay. James Heappey has. We've lost that line, sadly.
We got the gist, though. It would be good for morale.
Thank you very much indeed, James. It's fascinating to talk to someone who is out of politics when it comes to this sort of thing.
But can give us that perspective from the inside as well.
I'll tell you what, I did find it really interesting talking about the pay rises and armed forces. Because you can't give everyone in the armed forces a pay rise if it's going to come out of the existing budget when we know that the Army and Navy and Air Force are cash-strapped as it is. So it's an absolutely crazy situation. But then again, this new deal with ASLEF puts the average train driver on £70,000 a year.
Up from 60,000, yeah.
Which is far, far, far more than any soldier earns.
Yeah.
Your rank and file, your NCOs, they're not earning that anywhere near that sort of money. So why doesn't that need to be addressed, really?
Let us know what you think. gbnews.com/yoursay.